This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Westin. Jared Bernstein of the White House told us yesterday that the inflation numbers indicate the economy is coming back, but that it's not overheating, according to him at least. For a view from the other side of the aisle, we welcome now Republican Senator Mike Braun of Indiana. Welcome, Senator. Great to have you here. As we always say, it's great you're a senator, but also you're a businessman. You were a CEO yourself.
That's true.
So give us your take. We got those consumer numbers yesterday that surprised a lot of people how fast they're coming up. We have producer prices today that tend to underscore that. Where's the economy?
So the other thing I actually had from the past is a economics degree. So I remember a little bit about macroeconomics. If you want to be entertained, I wrestled with Bernie Sanders last night on the floor about the modern monetary theory. So you've got all that swirling around. And I think I'm not overly concerned about inflation in the short run. I am in the mid and long term because inflation's comprised of a couple things. Demand pull, which generally comes from monetary policy. Now, that's been so loose for a long time. If we were going to get that, we would have seen it by now. What's really kept a lid on inflation, though, is what's called cost push. That's what we had a good dose of along with the monetary pull back in the late 70s and 80s. When we become more of a global economy, I think it's kept a lid on inflation, especially labor, even inputs to some extent. So, but 20 trillion in debt when I got here, nearly 30 trillion in debt now. That is looming in the mid and long term for sure. So I think what we've got to be worried about more than that is getting people back to work. When I was on recess last week, small, medium, large businesses in Indiana were already almost back to full employment, can't get to that next level. We were probably close to 3% unemployment pre-COVID with the best economy in the 37 years I was running a business. So that's another part of what I think is going to bring us back. I think we'll have a little blip in inflation. I think it was 4.6% annualized. I think that even all the money we're dumping in, that we're going to still have the paradigm of that global economy keeping cost push inflation down.
Well, that's my question, I guess, Senator, which is it's pretty clear the demand is really roaring back. And that's both on the labor side and also in consuming goods and services. The supply does not seem to be keeping up. Can the supply catch up? And again, I mean both for labor. I think the jobs numbers last Friday showed that people want to hire people, but they can't find them to hire, but also in terms of buying goods and services.
Do what 6 or 7 Republican governors have already done. Get rid of that enhanced unemployment benefit. Most of your labor issues go away. We were tight on labor. That's why wages were going up, not through government, the old-fashioned way. And I've been a believer. You own a business, that should be one of the important things to keep people in place. Raise their wages and their benefits as you do well in your enterprise. So inputs, let's take lumber, for instance. A lot of that had to do with two things. Our borders were shut in many cases for some lumber coming from Canada, but most sawmills were not real healthy because they got hurt big time coming out of 08, 09. And in any business, I don't know, how good you are, you generally aren't sitting with a ton of extra capacity. And when demand changed like it did for outdoor furniture at home, remodeling, that was a large part of it. So I'm pretty confident that once we get COVID and all the bureaucratic decisions that were made that accentuated it out of the way, you'll even see things like lumber and other materials and supplies start to go down. Then worry about all the fiscal policy and a loose monetary policy that could hurt us in the mid and long term.
Senator, I know you're committed. I think every American has to be committed to getting the best economic policy out of Washington we can get. And most of us, when we took our political science courses, we believed a good, loyal opposition was helpful. Give us a sense of what role the Republicans can play as a loyal opposition here to make sure the economic policy is good. I know you just met with the minority leader, Mitch McConnell. What are the Republicans going to do in response to what President Biden's proposed?
So sadly, we're on the sidelines. You can see if it has anything to do with debt, revenue, taxes, spending, monetary policy swept through the Rescue Act it's going to be largely behind the American Jobs Act infrastructure. Everybody loves infrastructure, but there's been no discussion of how to pay for it. So we are going to have to be the sober side of life, because everybody wants the stuff that they, Madison Avenue, tab with rescue plan, COVID relief, infrastructure, even though less than 10% of it is that. We got to articulate it better, because you cannot add the $4 trillion we did in 2020, that was bipartisan, and another $6 trillion through government without consequences. Even historically low interest rates were the only reserve currency. When you, by 50%, increase your debt over 2.5 years, any little blip up in interest rates is going to start to add up in the federal treasury, even accentuating those trillion-dollar deficits.
On the next $4 trillion, President Biden has said he really wants to work with Republicans. Do you see any opportunity for that? Or let's be honest, if we can, are you really saying you got to make the record, bide your time, and hope that you take back the Senate in 2 years?
I think that's been largely a PR show. That was talked about in the Rescue Act, not one Republican vote or idea within it. Infrastructure is a little trickier, because that's got such great buy-in, even for many that support Republicans generally. So I still think it's going to be their way or the highway for Republicans, and whether we'll get a separate infrastructure package, I'm not sure. Here's another thing to think about. They talk about paying for it. If you took all of their tax proposals, put them all together, I think they're touting about $1.5 trillion over 10 years, $150 billion a year. That would be basically reversing what was actually working with our tax cuts that were closer to revenue neutral. That $150 billion a year, David, would be only 15% against our normal deficit, let alone talking about how to pay for the new stuff.
So, Senator Braun, when we talk about infrastructure, particularly this week, we have to think about pipelines, like that Colonial pipeline that got shut down, back open again, although it'll be a while before they get it fully delivering. Talk about infrastructure and what we could do, what, for that matter, you could do in the Congress to try to avoid the next one of these attacks, because they seem to be coming more and more frequently, these cyber attacks on infrastructure.
So that is a valid consideration, and that is very bipartisan in nature. So what we could do to shore it up by spending money to structurally kind of defend against it, we need to look at that, because it's not going to go away. I think Russia is going to be a continuous pest. Their economy is a resource-based economy. They're never going to be a player there like China will be. And wherever it's coming from, Russia, Iran, North Korea, who knows where else, including maybe China, we got to be on guard, because that is our biggest vulnerability. In my own business, we've got to fight it off every day. And if you are not invested in the best technology that prevents you from being a victim of ransomware, sooner or later you're going to get it. And obviously they're now taking on government to boot. So valid consideration. Hopefully we can come together there.
So, Senator, you've looked at the infrastructure bill as President Biden's proposed it. Is there money in there that could help address some of the concerns you have? And by the way, is this a matter of money?
I think it's more, no, not a matter of money, more than a matter of awareness. And I think we've got a lot of tools out there. Yes, it's going to cost something. And in $2.5 trillion, yes, there would be money there to devote to that. But currently, roads and bridges, which we mostly understand with infrastructure, that needs to be more. All the rest needs to be a little less.
Senator, always a pleasure to have you with us. Senator Mike Braun, Republican of Indiana, and this is Bloomberg.